Welcome, bienvenue. My name is Renee Ketchum and I curate the cultural offerings for AFUSA, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to Sargent and Paris and the Gilded Age with Beth Gersh-Nesic. AFUSA is the largest Alliance Française network in the world, helping 26,000 learners of French each year learn French, live French, and love French. And please take a look at our video explaining that. So please visit www.afusa to hear a little bit about our upcoming programming. We have some amazing summer films. Some are edgier than others. Please tune in on Monday for L'Inconnu du Lac with Peter de Bruges and myself, as well as two other films coming later in the summer. We also have some great book talks that we'll have up on the website soon. So please visit afusa.org and you'll be thrilled with our new programming coming up. A few logistics. Please stay on mute during the presentation, stay on speaker view, and please put your questions in the chat. If there are technical issues, sign back in after a couple of moments using the original Zoom link. This event is being recorded for our YouTube channel, and the total runtime is 1 hour. Beth Gersh-Nesic, PhD, is an art historian and the director of the New York Arts Exchange, an arts educational service. Known for her publications on Picasso, Cubism, the École de Paris, and the poet, critic André Salon, she also taught numerous courses on American art and late 19th century art movements to her undergraduate students at Purchase College, Mercy University, NYU, and the College of New Rochelle. She has been contributing articles on art history to Bonjour Paris since 2016, and her most recent publications are translations for Zamir Press, Pablo Picasso and André Salon, the painter, the poet, and portraits, Pablo Picasso, André Salon, and Young French Paintings, and Ayant Before Midnight by Jean-Luc Poulquin. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alliance Française of USA. Thank you, Renee. This is your idea, so we have to say thank you because we love, you and I love this exhibition, Sargent and Paris, and we hope that everybody will visit because this is, it's going to close on August 3rd, so please make a point of seeing the show before it closes. Okay, so let's get to it, all right? Okay, we'll start the slideshow. All right, the title of this exhibition is Sargent in Paris, not Sargent in Paris, but and Paris. Paris is a character. Paris is a relationship with Sargent. And we decided earlier in advance that we would call it With the Gilded Age. So it turns out, to my surprise, that Sargent is a character in this television program, which started its third season on June 22nd. But there is a problem, which the writers know is true. The visit of Sargent is in 1884, and our whole discussion today is about 1884 and the whole scandal of Madame X. So there's no way that he was in New York. Here is our star. This is in 1886, 2 years after the date that we will actually, it's a period between 1874 and 1884, but this is how he looks, a handsome young man. And this is the exhibition. I'm going to walk you through it just a little bit. And I have to thank the Metropolitan Museum of Art for sending me these beautiful slides. So we're looking at the entrance. It's a beautiful, capacious room, and you have this wonderful photo. This photo is of the studio in Paris, and we can see, take a look very closely at Madame X. You may be familiar with this painting from the Metropolitan. Both of her straps are on her shoulders. This is the point. When it was painted originally, one strap was falling down, and that caused a great commotion. We will talk about that in a moment. So you've walked through the big room with black and white, and you enter into the room, which is combination of the works that he did as a student and his early work. So we'll go through these individually. And then you're looking through, and that painting, which is at the end of your view, is the work that we'll discuss that's called, it's Fumé Ambre Gris, it's Smoke and Ambergris. This room you walk into is his travels. In particular, we see on the left side, we're looking at Capri, and on the right side, we're looking at Brittany. And we'll go through some of these individually. And we're going to go past this room. I don't have an installation shot for the Met for this one. And that room is full of the exotic places he went to, Morocco, and for him, Spain was exotic too. So we turn the corner and we go into a room that's full of portraits. And this particular wall is extremely important because these are three portraits that do not exist together in one venue. So just come to the show for this excitement, and we'll discuss each of these individually. So this is quite an experience for me. They're all together. And we turn around to the left side, and you can see that this is now a combination of well-known portraits that he has created. The one that you probably know best is the portrait of Dr. Posey in his magnificent red gown. And so, Renee, you and I have talked about that red gown. We love it. We love the way that he's posing.
Well, it's
So,
the texture, Beth, of that gown. I mean,
yeah,
literally, and it's the color. It's that rich blue red that's amazing. And then the other details that I know I can imagine that you're going to share with us next.
exactly. So we're going to have a long time talking about Dr. Posey. And then we turn to the left again into another gallery. This gallery is full of artists who are not Sargent, and it gives you a context in which we can talk about the society. The society of people who have their portraits done, the elite, and who are the leading artists of the moment. At this time, bring yourself back to 1883, 84, Sargent is aspiring. He's not well known amongst the people who are in this room. So you have to have an appreciation for who are the leaders at that time. And then we move into a room that's dedicated entirely to Madame X, sketches and all kinds of other information to know what happened to that painting and what happened to her. Then we leave that room and we come into a room which is sort of a postscript that gives you information about what happened to Sargent at the time when he realized that the scandal which occurred was going to impact his income and he needed to move on with his career. So we'll discuss the individual works of art that belong to this room too, particularly La Carmencita. Okay. We just to tell you, because I don't have an individual slide, this is Rodin, and so it indicates that he knew the famous sculptor Rodin. Okay, here he is. This is John Singer Sargent, self-portrait we've seen a moment ago of 1886, and a little bit older in 1903. He died in 1925, so this is the centenary of his death. And read along with me. So very quickly, his parents are Americans. His parents are Fitzwilliam Sargent, and his mother is Mary Newbold Sargent, Singer Sargent. And they married in 1850. They had a child in 1851, Mary, and Mary passed away at 2 years old. His mother, Sargent's mother, was so distraught, she probably had a nervous breakdown. Her husband, who was a physician, felt she needed a change of air, and he brought her to Europe to recover. They never returned. And so Sargent was born in 1856 at the beginning of the year, January 12th. A year later, his sister Emily was born. And so this is it should be Emily. I have Mary there. That's a mistake. 1857. And then after Emily in 1860, he had another sister, Mary, named Minnie, and she died about at 4 years old. And after that child was born, there was another little boy who was born in I think it was 1866, and he died at about 1 year old. He was Fitzwilliam, named after his dad. And then the fifth child was born in 1870, and that's Violet. And Violet lived to adulthood. So only John and Emily and Violet lived to adulthood. And it's Violet's children who are responsible for keeping his legacy alive, the Ormond family. In 1874, at 18 years old, John Singer Sargent decided to apply to the Academy in Florence. He was born in Florence. He spoke Italian, English, French, and German fluently. His French was perfect, we were told by his friend, whose name is Vernon Lee. Her real name is Violet Piaget. But anyway, the point is that in her memoirs, she described his ability to read and write French perfectly. So, unfortunately, he did not pass the tests in Florence, and he came to Paris, which you can imagine he was very comfortable there. And he passed all the exams, the École Nationale Supérieure exams, and he chose to study with an individual artist. That's how it's done. You just go to one individual atelier, and you usually choose somebody who you feel is going to teach you what you want to know. So for Sargent, he knew about this fellow, Carolus-Duran, that was his stage name. And the idea, and he wasn't that much older, maybe 10 years older. And so the idea was that he was going to get into this grand manner, to be a person who is painting with distinction and academic care. And the other person he studied with, we're told, after hours, after he spent the day at the studio under Duran's mentorship, was Leo Bonnat. So we're going to look at his work as well. In 1877, Sargent submits Fanny Watts. You just saw the portrait of her, and that gets a lot of positive reinforcement. In 1878, he submits another painting, which is setting out to fish for the fishing season, and that was one of the paintings that you saw going into the room for his first paintings, and that also received very positive comments. So he's doing well. We start out in the room where we're looking at some of the sketches that belong to his early year. This one we know is from 1874 to 77, so it's probably in the Duran studio. And what we want to appreciate is his consummate draftsmanship. He's excellent in every possible way in terms of shading, in terms of the contours and the details. He had such gifts that even the students who have recorded their memories of him have pointed out that once he arrived, he really blew everyone away. What I want you to appreciate is even in this sketch, this is something that belongs to his student years. There's an interesting way of seeing the pose and having a perspective of the individual, which is something we want to look at as we go through his works. The other thing, which is very interesting, this is in Capri. He has chosen somebody to be his model, and we have this wonderful white on white. He has an ability to capture these nuances of tonality that's astonishing, and then he'll throw off that kind of medley of different tones with another beautiful color, something that just contrasts in a beautiful way. And so we're looking here at the way he creates this little still life. And we have, as you can see, almost a cubist kind of attention, a proto-cubist kind of attention to the vessel. It's really quite remarkable. So he was influenced by some of the trends that were coming to the avant-garde, to Impressionism at the time. 1874 is when the Impressionists come about. And then we have his attention to details, which is academic. So you see this kind of combination in his art. And also, as always, please, the idea that he seems to see the psychology of the individual through the expression that he chooses for that human being. Now, this is a portrait of his teacher. This is Carolus-Duran, which was in the Salon of 1879, and it receives honorable mention. So now he's on his way with awards, and he needs that. And so you can see from the photograph that it is really faithful to the appearance of the artist with a little bit of personality. This is what he brings to his art. And some people commented it was just a little bit too over the top, something that seemed to give his teacher the look of a very proud dandy. But it's really quite magnificent. Now, here's Carolus-Duran. You have to appreciate what he brings to a work of art because he's very popular. And those people in society, as I show you in a moment, choose him because he is the one in 1884. The Russells really should have chose Carolus-Duran. We're looking at something from 1869, so it's a bit dated for this moment of 1884, but all the ingredients are there. And when you see this at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, you'll be able to see some of the details that are so necessary if you've been commissioned by a person in high society. Now, this is his wife, but it's important for this to be an example of his consummate talent. And we have, of course, a wonderful shape for the clothing because the clothing is actually the star of the show. Now, here is Mrs. Astor. And I brought this in because some of you are probably following The Gilded Age, which is on television. We have Donna Murphy playing the role of Caroline Webster Skirmahorn. But you can see she chose Carolus-Duran because she is a woman, as you know, in her character. She is a woman of discerning taste. And you can tell that here we have really distinct details, care, attention, and her clothing speaks for everything, her taste and her position and her power. But also, I just want you to know that Carolus-Duran wasn't a one-note person. He also was looking at contemporaries. And this particular portrait tells us he knew Edouard Manet in 1880. Edward Manet died in 1883, I have to tell you, sadly, a very short life. And the whole idea is for you to see some of the brushwork that was closer in character to the fast painting that belongs to the artists from the 17th century, particularly Velázquez and Hals. I'll tell you exactly what I'm talking about. Here is our beautiful Velázquez that belongs to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I hope you are familiar with Juan de Pareja. He worked with Velázquez. There's a very long story that goes with that, so just look it up on the internet. But what I want you to appreciate is the brushwork we see, so specifically a Velázquez kind of treatment on the collar that also goes into what seems to be a sort of lacy area here, very subtle, but all of this kind of bravura that belongs to the brushstroke is brought into Sargent and his work and his followers. So when we look at the proof, it's here in the exhibition. On the left side is Las Meninas, which is in the Prado. And on the right side, we're looking at Sargent's copy. So we're well aware of how much he takes from Velázquez and also that he's seen everything very closely and he's studied it carefully. In addition, we have the Franz Hals. This is the Banquet of the Officers of St. George Militia of 1627 that is in the Franz Hals Museum in Haarlem. But we know that Sargent went to Holland, and in the exhibition we have his copy. And this is only this, oops, I'm sorry, this fellow here. He looks like Richard Chamberlain to me. And it's something which you can see has this sort of brushwork, that really texture, as Renee was talking about with Dr. Posey's gown. The texture is something you can only appreciate if you are in front of the work of art because it's really quite substantial. Now, if you're talking about Léo Bonnat, on the left side, we're looking at Charles de Frézy, the Bomo. He is a person who was very wealthy at the time, very influential in the arts. He's a whole story, which I can't get into now, but I want you to appreciate that people who wanted to be connected, well connected, would know Léo Bonnat and hopefully Charles de Frézy, who was a collector. We can see in 1855, the Bonnat is the academic artist par excellence, really care, well delineated, the licked surface. And then he starts to build up his brushwork in a bit that's different from his early years. So let's take a look at an example in the show. In the show, we have the Comtesse de Potocka. And we can see when we're in front of her that we have beautiful details in her skirt. This is wonderful lace, but we also see the texture of her cloak. So that way we can feel the sense of the wealth that she has through her clothing. And this is something that is extremely significant. The artist is responsible for making the sitter look beautiful physically, yes, in the face, but also that her clothing has to really be of the first order. So when we look at Dr. Posey, and Renee, please tell me, because you had such lovely things to say about this work of art, what struck you as the most interesting? Oh, you're on mute, so you have to unmute.
No, again, I think as I said before, the way you approach this painting in full length and the vibrancy of the color, and red is very much the color of the moment in the world right now. So we're really looking at reds. But also, I think you had talked also about his incredible hands and the way he the way the fingers are moving on this and his gaze, but the color and the texture of this, is going to make you want to get on Etsy and see if you could find one similar.
It's true. I know. And that's what, thank you so much, Renee, because we had this conversation before, so I'm sorry, but we're going to have to geek out on that. Because the whole idea is that we got so excited about there's a vitality in his art that makes you feel like these people are present. And he invites you into their world. This is part of the excitement of going to the show. What I think is he's chosen not to wear a suit. He's a doctor, a gynecologist, if I understand that. He's supposed to be a lover of Madam X, but that's not really substantiated. The whole idea that we have to appreciate is how he decides to look like he's a movie star here with a very proud stance that Sargent delivers on. I mean, he gives him a full and I think really robust presence as a man who's a lady killer, right? Now here is Fanny Watts. And notice this is what's so great about Sargent. She's another kind of personality. She looks at you side-eyed. There's some kind of sparkle in her eye, at least for me. I think that there's some kind of complicit information between the two of us, as though she said something and we're supposed to get it. And so she pulls her body a little away from us, which gives her dynamism in her sitting. And then also we have a dark outfit here, something that looks like her gown is black. And then we have a little bit of red to give attention to the area that's around her neck. And then we see beautiful lace, which really has, for me, a lot of interest if you can study it close up, as well as on her cuffs. And then the background is rather, it's a homogeneous color that has some inflection, so it doesn't bring attention to itself, and then of course frames her so well. We can see that's probably a studio because it seems to be like a curtain. We can see some of the folds right there. Now, another side of his art is the influence of Impressionism, and he will appear in some textbooks that have a large umbrella of what they call Impressionism. But if I remember Monet himself did not accept Sargent, I guess, as a bona fide member of the club. So we have that. We do want to appreciate the fact that he was starting to pay attention to the way that they also had a brushstroke that was quick. It spoke, of course, to this idea of modernity, the ephemeral, that's part of understanding Impressionism. And then we also have the applications, very quick, of areas like gardens and so forth. For me, the most interesting part of this painting is the way that he captures reflection, Impressionism, that's one of their ingredients. That is just really remarkable. I could look at this forever. This is a glittering pool of water. Now, what does an Impressionist look like? Just to remind you, Claude Monet, this is Springtime, A Girl in a Pink Dress 2, 1874, 2 years before Sargent arrives, but the exhibition for the Impressionists was 1874. And I have to correct myself. We can say that Impressionism starts at the end of the 1860s, but when they have their show and they call themselves the Independents, they're really not called Impressionists. That's something that was a name given to them by the critics. Also, I think you should understand Whistler at the time, and Whistler and Sargent are both these emigres to Europe. They're expats, we call them. And so they're a combination of many influences that don't make them like the true American who's just stayed home and been taught by American institutions. So as I'm speaking, I hope you're giving this a beautiful Cremorne Gardens um, a good moment of looking at the individual people, the treatment of all of these different costumes. It's really Whistler at his best, in which it's very quick, it's summarized, and you want to feel as though there's movement that goes along with a medley of different colors. Okay, so that's the sort of thing in my mind when I look at the Luxembourg by Sargent that I bring along with me as I look on the wall to the things that he created for Capri, the areas that now he's traveling around at the same time that he's a student. And one of the things that I appreciate again is looking at the way he describes these architectural settings with white and then areas that are just touched with some kind of brown beige that gives you a sense of depth, a sense of articulation, of form, and also this woman with her beautiful pink part of her dress that gives her a sense of importance. Also, that she's a main character here. This woman is singing, and that's also important to us too. But we want to look at her body and the way he captures women. He was not afraid to be really original in the way that he would have a woman pose with an interesting form. Now, this is something Renee and I talked about, though, because this is important to both of us. When you saw this painting, what was your reaction?
You know, I'm fascinated, Beth, with the use of white. I always think of, I think it's Monet's painting La Pie. But this painting is all in white, and it's just the gradations of white at this incredible staircase with the green at the top. I mean, it's almost a journey in itself, and the light is very much like the painting you were just talking about. So it's a beautiful painting.
And thank you for pointing that out, because the light is really one of the features in his art. You want to pay attention to that, which makes Madame X also quite unusual in his oeuvre. And the other thing too is um, we have to tell you, Renee and I are talking about a green that you don't see in the digital slide. It's much more vibrant. So please see the show. I can't tell you enough, because this is a stunning work of art. And also you want to see it at the size it is. It's not so nice to see such a tiny slide. Next to it, on the left side, is this adorable ensemble of children who are on the beach, and this little boy has water wings. You may not notice that, so let me just point that out. So they're just adorable, and the whole idea for us is to recognize all the different places that he's gone, captured individuals in a kind of candid way, as opposed to the society portraits, which is another side of his talents. And by the way, if you are a person who goes to the Berkshires and you are looking forward to the Sargents, they're in New York. So just heads up on that one. Here, this belongs to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. We have this beautiful painting. Again, as Renee points out, we love to look at his white on white, and there's such a variety that you can go from gallery to gallery and kind of groove on the way that there are different ideas of white on white. So here we have something that seems just a little bit more yellowish, and he's used the shadows and everything to create shapes and forms that make it interesting in the composition. This is a pinkish area here, which seems to bring attention to this red door that's kind of weathered. So there's many things. You could just spend hours and hours looking at one individual painting, almost as though it's abstract. Now, this painting is, for me, the best. I adore this, and it is in the Williams. So once again, if you've decided to go to the Clark, you won't see it there, but it'll be back. But this painting is going to go to Paris, I believe, so you won't be able to see it in Massachusetts for a while. Let's take a look at what he's done here. We have what appears to be this sort of gray white, a cool white, I would say, and then we have a kind of yellowy white in the gown that she is wearing. We also have these beautiful areas inside her sleeves, which is like an apricot kind of orange. And then her sleeves are also a cool white versus this yellowish white that's really remarkable. And all of this gives us a contrast to the beautiful colors that are at her feet. We have these rugs on top of rugs, and we also have the tiles. So it really is an extraordinary composition of all of these different textures, different colors. And then we also have the incense burner, which is silver, and you want to pay attention to how he accomplishes the feeling of reflection. And then we move up, and this is not to be missed. She has a kind of brooch here, or a clasp that's supposed to be silver as well. And it's really complicated. So when you, if you want to, I think that the tour that we have on the internet has a close-up of this particular element, but you do want to pay attention to it because it's just beautifully formed with his wonderful brushstrokes. Now we move into this room. Again, these individual works of art are not in the same place, but this is one family. So we have Marie Boulot's Pailleron, I hope I have the pronunciation correct, from 1879. She is the daughter of the owner and editor of a journal that is well plugged into the art scene. So she and her family are what Sargent really accomplishes well, a connection that he needs in the art world in France, in Paris particularly. And so you can see that she's wearing a rather fancy dress to be out in what looks like a country scene. This could be the property that they live on, because we have really far in the background, there's we can see that there is a house, so it looks like a mansion. And there she is, somewhat windswept. And if you know your Gainsborough, you feel she's right out of a Gainsborough. This is her husband. He is a playwright and a poet. He holds what appears to be a book to me, which would indicate, he's a literary fellow. But he's posed in such a way as Sargent usually is working with his models. This isn't something that they are deciding on their own. So he is posing in, I think, a rather confident way, maybe a little bit of pride there. But it's interesting that his shirt seems to be pulling out of his trousers. And so he looks a little devil-may-care. He's an artiste, and therefore, he doesn't have to look all buttoned up and proper. And these are the children. So we're looking at the portrait of Edward and Marie-Louise Pailleron. I think this painting was also in the Brooklyn show in what was it, 2005, I think it was. And so the whole idea is for you to recognize how he's put the children in the ambiance that has a little bit more information about the family and the taste that they have. This looks like a lot of Oriental rugs, and they look at you directly. And Renee, you had talked about that. So if you would unmute for a moment, you had picked up on the fact, you asked, Sargent has people look at you and sometimes they don't look at you. Do you think that that has anything to do with the feeling of the painting for you?
Well, I think what's really interesting about the Sargent paintings in general is that the most of them really, I mean, it's as if you and the subject are looking at each other. It's a gaze that welcomes. I mean, we're all, I forget which artist who said, but we're all made to look at each other. So there's something very interesting about his use of the gaze that almost reflects your gaze back.
Perfect point to make. We're looking at them, they're looking at us, but they're made to be looked at. And they have commissioned these portraits to be seen. They want you to remember them in that way. And Sargent is responsible for remembering them. And postscript on Marie-Louise, she was the person who actually remembers who he was. And she has kept that was published. So we have some recollections of his personality thanks to her. Now, this is one of the best known paintings among those group paintings of children. It's in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. And I have an authority from a friend of mine who lives in Boston that these vases are in the gallery. If you see the painting in its mother venue. So it goes to the point that Renee was bringing up, that we have different perspectives of the children looking at us. This child and this child look at us directly as if we walked into the room, and this child actually doesn't. You have to be close to her, but she shyly has a gaze that averts your looking at her, as the child would, of course. And then this individual child, the oldest, I believe, is in profile, so we don't have a direct contact with her. They're located in their Paris apartment, and this is part of Sargent's world. These are Americans who live, like he does, in a European enclave of expats. And in this particular instance, you can see that this is a really big and rather stately room that the family has in their apartment. This is I think it's Boit B-O-I-T, we would say like Detroit or Boîte. I'm not sure. I haven't asked. And this painting is in a room which is opposite the copy that we see. I gave you previously to look at that Sargent made, Sargent's copy of Las Meninas. But in this particular slide, I'm showing you the real Las Meninas for you to recognize that we feel that there's some kind of influence of Las Meninas in terms of children in an ambiance, in a capacious ambiance, and the idea that, you know, they're arranged in a certain way with psychological contact. The same way, this is a painting that belongs to the Met, so it's in the show to give you a sense of what Sargent might have seen. This is 1878. He certainly had access when it was in the Salon of 1878, Renoir. And this is a painting in which, again, it's the modern painting. You have to go through the history of portraiture to understand how this is modern. And there's this wonderful essay that is in the catalog. So I do encourage you to buy the catalog. It's a really great catalog full of different essays that are informative. So you need to understand what the portrait is about. In this particular instance, the modernity of it is that it's so casual. I mean, they're not standing and looking very proper. So this is a little girl and she's sitting on the dog, which sort of reminds me of the little boy who plays with the dog, or the dwarf, people will argue, in Las Meninas. And then this is a little boy. Little girls and little boys had the same clothing up to a certain age. And then the mother also seems rather casual as she looks toward the children. You know, there's really something spontaneous. And then the whole background, the Charpentier, they're also plugged into the art world, and you see their taste. It's usually things from Japan that they are known for in their collection. So all of these are paintings which have to do with the identity. It's this Degas, the Bellelli family, which we had at the Metropolitan, I think it was a year ago, in the Degas Manet show, that you see real psychological intrigue. We have the family that's divided. The mother and the children are on this side. The father seems to be blocked off on the other side. I don't believe, it's 1858, that Sargent saw this, even though he was 2 years old. I don't think that he would have remembered what this looks like. And I don't know if he had access to it through Degas. But the whole idea is for you to recognize that the modern paintings are starting to have much more of this, let's say, narrative or, you know, psychological content. This painting is the one that received the second-class medal. So now in 1880, in the Salon of 1881, I should say, we have a Sargent who's acquired two important accolades, and he no longer needs to show his work to the jury. He's now free of the jury's criticism, and therefore, you know, it's a wonderful feeling that you can just submit any work of art. You can start being experimental. We see that with Gustave Courbet, with his story. So it's something that you have to appreciate. Now he's entered into what we might call the acceptance from the art world. And this is beautiful. You must see this in person. One of the things you can appreciate is that she is a medley of the black and the white on this side of the painting. And this blue is really significant. When you see it, it radiates. It's just really a marvel. And she herself is twisted. And Renee, you talked about how he twists. We were talking about this. I'm putting you on the spot. Something, because you are a yoga master, you're so aware of the physicality of these paintings.
So Beth, I find it really interesting, and it's interesting that you asked me this question here because I think you see it again in Madame X. And the way the shoulder is moved, that she's very uncomfortable sitting like that. But the purpose of that exterior rotation of that left shoulder opens up her chest and then gives, in my opinion, gives sort of a mathematical importance or geometric importance to the line of her face. But the way she is to sit like that is he seated her on purpose to create more space in the front of her body, which is geometrically very interesting.
Thank you, because we have to appreciate that. Look what he created, and we love that. But then, of course, if she posed that way, that must have been really quite painful.
Really uncomfortable, yeah.
Yes, but anything for art. So art first. Now, this is something, if you saw the first episode of The Gilded Age and you have Mrs. Russell make some pronouncement about, oh, I love the lady with rose, this is Charlotte Louise Burkhart, and there is some intrigue behind this painting. I think that she looks as though she's smiling in such a way that she and Sargent sort of have a secret joke between the two of them because her mouth isn't straight. It kind of looks amused. She holds her rose, and Mrs. Russell said something about it's like girlhood into womanhood, but I think this is more about a petulant young lady who has a crush on Sargent, but he doesn't return it because it's obvious. We know from historical evidence that he doesn't really have the same interest in her, but they're friends. The family, the Burkhart family is friends with the Sargent family. So here we are at the full length. This is what I want you to appreciate. The clients who commissioned a full length were commissioning a more expensive painting. And so materialistically, it announced itself as being some kind of object that was expensive, and therefore it had more value. And how long has it been since we've had the full length? In my experience, and somebody can correct me, please, but this is the oldest I can go back to in terms of so-called modern, and this is the modern age in terms of the Renaissance to the present. So Norman Cantor was my teacher at Binghamton. So this is the roots of modern life is when you start with the Renaissance. And so here we are, we're looking at the Arnolfini double portrait. I keep thinking marriage portrait because in my day that was what it was called, from 1434. And the whole idea is it's exactly the same as the society portrait that I'm trying to impress upon you. It's the clothing, it's the ambiance, it's the furniture. Everything in this painting of 1434 is about their wealth and their place in society. So perhaps you can appreciate that because of course it's the Renaissance, but even the dog is a very expensive dog. So if you know your history of dogs, you would appreciate that all of these are individual aspects of family of considerable wealth. And we also have, if you are the Metropolitan, go to the American wing, we also have that trope of children or young ladies in this case holding a flower. So I don't know if Sargent was aware of that, but that goes back to our colonial period. Now, Madame X. This is, of course, the star of the show is Madame X, as well as Sargent. Remember, it's Sargent and Paris. So what happened in Paris, And the point is for you to understand what it is that made this painting the cause for his downfall, the cause célèbre for his career at a very early age. Because now, at this point in 1884, he's only 30. And we're looking at the painting as we know it now. We're looking at a woman whose name was Virginie Amélie Avegno Gautreau. She was American, just like, in a certain way, you might say, parallel to Sargent. Now, Sargent moved around with his family, so he was a nomad, and he was often with this enclave of these expats. So he would live in Florence and Rome. He would live in Paris. He would live in Nice and so forth. So his situation is unique, and it's difficult for us to really understand. The curators want you to believe. This is their thesis, that because he is trained in Paris and all of his sensibilities as an artist are French, that he is French, and I will accept that. I do believe that's how you can see him, but he's American in a lot of other ways, and in the library, he's in the American section. She is from Louisiana. She was born in Louisiana. She's identified in the literature as a white Creole. So we have these two people who in France are still outsiders. And the other thing too you have to appreciate is that she was considered an influencer. Everything she did was in what were their newspapers of the time, talking about gossip and all the rest of it, what she wore. Her makeup was influential. It was something that was sort of a lavender. It had actually a little bit of lead in it. It was very pale during the day. If it were I think in natural light, it's what's eerie, but it worked very well with dim light in the evening. So we have to appreciate that. She also painted her ears this sort of rose color. So she was quite a sort of uh, something that was artificial as opposed to naturally there. And Renee, you had something, you had read this in the, I think, one of the essays that was in the catalog about the way she was seen as a statue. What was that about?
I think that from what I recall is, I mean, she used very, very heavy makeup. So what's so interesting is that at, she's a beautiful woman, but she was very artificial in the way that she cared for herself. She created this image, as you just said, as an influencer. But the fact that Sargent was also interested in the artificial versus the real, I think, is a very interesting way to look at this painting.
Thank you for pointing that out. So that's what I think is really important. You pointed out something really significant. She is artificial, and he is going to make this a work of art. And one of the curators at the end of the tour says he makes a difference between a portrait versus a work of art. And that's in the essay. He develops that as a concept. We may not appreciate that. A portrait was somewhat utilitarian, and so it was distinguished from being art, which is narrative, which was supposed to tell lessons, which was supposed to reflect culture. It had its own reason for being. And a portrait, which was supposed to be commissioned by an individual, not all the time, obviously, this was not commissioned. He ran after her. He had a friend who knew her and asked for the introduction, and it was his decision that he would paint her as his entree into the high society, the kind of society that he wanted to commission. And he felt this was going to be his breakthrough, and that it would be something that people admired to such an extent. It would be amazing. So that's how he sort of lifted his ego and placed all of his cards in this particular painting. And you will see when you go through the exhibition that it is unusual in his oeuvre because she's in black, and she has this kind of chocolate brown background. It's rather it's quiet in comparison to the kinds of razzle dazzle that we see for his commissioned work. I want to point out that her little crown, this little jewel thing up at the top, is a crescent moon, and the iconography people believe is that it references Diana, the goddess of the moon, and also she's a virgin goddess, Virginie, her name. And then also here is very difficult to see this, but these are supposed to be sirens. Sirens, like in the Odyssey, these women who were dangerous, and they would try to capture men and transform them. So she's a dangerous woman. Let's just say that. But Renee, you have pointed out the way that she stands with her shoulder. This may be why it was seen as vulgar. So explain to me what it is that you see with that
So
shoulder.
to me, it's very blatant. So the way he's also treating her, she is this artificial influence, but she is a great beauty. But again, that exterior rotation of the shoulder that accentuates the chest and elevates her, it's uncomfortable, but it creates, again, as you and I have talked about before, a certain kind of geometry that works with her, that right arm, and then down to her ski jump nose, and then across. So it makes it, and it also gives her, she's showing off here. I mean, she's doing something with her chest that is not a natural pose at all. So it accentuates the artificial as well, I think, in my opinion.
Excellent. I mean, that's what I really need. Thank you so much, because that's exactly, you can see it. And that's what's important, because I have been doing this for so long that I have to say things like I so on rote. But thank you for that, because we need to know why he decided on the strap falling off of her shoulder, which created such a sensation. It is abstractly, which you see with your own eyes, a really interesting composition. And we love that with the dynamism. And again, as you pointed out earlier, with Madame Stuber-Sesson, that that she is in a very uncomfortable pose for a person to stand for such a long time, but it works in terms of a sort of abstraction of the composition. Now, this is really the cause célèbre, that when people saw that the strap was coming down off of her shoulder, they felt as though her clothing she was having, one of those technical, what is it called, a costume, oh, I forgot the words, but it's the one that had happened during the Super Bowl where there was a dysfunction. And it turns out that people had read it as something that had to do with the way that her clothing was coming off of her body. Let me just put it that way. And you can see in the woodcut just a little bit more definition in the black and white, which is difficult for us to see when we look at the slide as a digital slide. Here is a copy after the fact. I mean, this is not before a sketch, and therefore she doesn't even have a strap at all, and it's really risque. Now, what we know about this moment is that Sargent went to her villa that was outside of Paris, and he stayed with her, trying to figure out how he was going to pose her. This was one idea. This is Madame Gautreau drinking a toast. Now, Madame Gautreau, I have to tell you, was 19 years old when she married Pierre Gautreau. So her mother brought her to Paris after her father died in the Civil War. Maybe a few years later, she was 8 years old, and her mother decided that she would be educated in Paris, and then she had fluent French and everything perfect. She would be married to a very wealthy man, and that was accomplished. And if you're watching the Gilded Age, that's what happened with women. They were supposed to be marrying someone who was going to bring them wealth. Or the other way around, the dollar princesses were bringing wealth and buying a title. So when we're thinking about Virginie, we're talking about a woman who, on the one hand, had this acquired wealth, but still was considered an outsider, yet she became an influencer, which is interesting. And also, she was a person who was identified as perhaps somebody who carried on affairs. So we can see with this drinking of a toast something that goes along with her reputation of being a grand bon vivant, right? This is how she really looked. And she was considered to be a great beauty, beautiful figure, and as you can see, beautiful clothing and all the rest of it. So this is an opportunity to see her three-quarter instead of always profile, which she preferred. And so here it is that this, there's a number in the room that belongs to the painting itself, a number of these sketches where we see that Sargent's trying to find her and figure out how he's going to pose her. And in this particular instance, Whispers, for example, this seems to be a candid. Remember, there's no photographs for these individuals at her villa. And so this seems to be a candid with a woman whose name is Judith Gautier, for us speaking English. And there is a beautiful painting of Judith Gautier in the exhibition. So look for that. Now, I want you to understand how it is that Madame X was seen, because we may not be able to appreciate it in this world where movie stars are on the red carpet and very little is worn as a rule rather than the exception. So we're looking, can you see this? This is a whole bunch of stuff that belongs to the Salon at that time, and they're making fun of it in La Caricature. Here's Madame X, and we're going to have a close up here in which you can see that the straps are down on both sides. So it really emphasizes the view of what the audience thought was really vulgar in this painting. In this particular instance, she's located here. Okay, there are other sketches of works of art. And you can see in this one, I think it's crystal clear that the way that this strap seemed to pull on her bodice, that people felt as though it was actually pulling off of the body and exposing too much, right? So it says here, Mele, she was known as Emily. So Mele, you're losing your dress. And she answers, oh, yes, on purpose. So, leave me in peace. It's none of your business. Okay, so this is the perception. And then another one, which I thought was interesting, she seems to be, and this is about the dark colors on one on top of the other, the black on top of this chocolate brown background, in which she's a playing card. She's made to feel, you're made to understand that it's a flat painting in the perception of this audience. And so you can see, let me give you a close-up, that now she looks like a playing card, like the Queen of Spades, as you can see that. And I think it's really hilarious that they've got her strap coming off and her skinny forearm in such a way that it really calls attention to itself. Now, in this show, in another gallery, we're going to see Madame, this is Lady Muse by Whistler. And so the curators want you to understand what is at stake for Sargent in terms of competition, in terms of the taste of the moment. This particular woman, whose name is Valerie Susan Longden, was just like Madame Gautreau. She was married into wealth. And so in this particular instance, she was a singer. I think she performed. She was a performer, we would say. She marries Sir Henry Muse, who became a baronet. His money was from beer. And this particular painting is from Honolulu. So you want to see this because I'm not going to Honolulu anytime soon. Down the street, if you go to the Frick, which reopened, we love the new Frick. This is a portrait of Lady Muse in what Whistler calls this harmony of pink and gray. It's magnificent. And so you can see her in a gown. This is like a visiting gown, and she's dressed to go visiting for the afternoon in the most consummate style of taste and beauty and elegance, everything that is magnificent at that time. And she also has a kind of twist in her body, which gives her personality. Back to the Carolus-Duran, just to remind you about the fact that the clothing and the idea of the shape of the clothing is so interesting and important. And we look at the clothing of different eras in these paintings to date them, because it was sort of fast fashion at the time, and you wanted to be wearing the latest clothing. So clearly it was narrow. We got into the 80s, and it was full up through the 60s into the beginning of the 70s. Here, for example, in the 80s, her clothing is somewhat of a close and a clear line that was different from the sort of three-dimensional look that we find when we're considering the 60s, which had a very wide skirt. Okay, now Comtesse de Potocka had a circle, her own salon, and the people who were intellectuals were part of her group. So Sargent being part of the group would be advantageous. We also have Guérin, or Giron, I think this would be Charles-André Giron, Alexandre, Charles-Alexandre de Giron. I don't know this man, so that's the reason why I'm stumbling over his name. I cannot even remember in my experience of looking at society portraits finding his work, but this is the consummate experience, because here she is with her magnificent clothing. This is now the silhouette of the 1880s, and when you get very close to it, every single detail is an evidence. So you have to study this carefully to understand what is the correct and desired society portrait. Full length, all of your clothing well articulated, your wealth, and most of all, a woman's sense of self-possession. She's not giving herself away. She's holding back. She's got her gloves and everything. She's buttoned up, but she's proud, and that's her power. Manet also delivers, and he's not a society portraitist, but he does occasionally have portraits in his body of work. We're looking again at the Silhouette 1876, in which she's got wasp waist, beautiful clothing that has to do with her wealth and her taste, and of course, the whole idea of her being very erect and very proud. We have, of course, Sarah Bernhardt. We have to remember her. She was also an influencer. She's much more in the vein of Madame X, where she's seductive in her presentation. It's not about being buttoned up, but rather about a person who seems to have a body, a face, everything, which will make men just fall at her feet. And this is Clarin, another really important society portraitist. So back to Madame X and the whole idea of what she represents for Sargent in this moment is that she was supposed to be his entrance into a career where he's successful. He's the heir apparent to Carolus-Duran. But, and as you can see, it was an unexpected failure. It was an unexpected moment in which there was derision. And so the question to ask is, what did he do afterwards? For Madame X, she continued. We think that, well, she didn't get all of the invitations that she used to get, but she did have a maybe more reclusive, quiet life. She remained still not completely thrown out of society. She just had a smaller crowd that was loyal to her. But look at the way that she in 1891 still goes for having the shoulder exposed with her clothing. Here she looks a little more virginal. This is Gustave Courtois. And then, as you can see, I'm showing you again the difference between, just to remind you, the way that Sargent corrected the strap after the Salon, not during the Salon. So the Salon, we only have the photographs and the example that's in a woodcut. Again, we have Madame Gautreau, and she was from the back, which was an idea that Sargent had thought about and didn't go with. And here she is also with her beautiful clothing, and always it's her profile. So she's set in the history of art for what she represents, Madame Gautreau. But what happens after for Sargent? Okay, in 1886, he moves to London, not 84. I mean, people think like he packed up and said enough, but it took him a while. He didn't really like London. He visited it, but he didn't see himself living there. It was Henry James, another expat American, who persuaded him in 1882 that he should move there. And finally, he decided that he would move after this debacle in Paris. So he sets up in Chelsea and remains there for the rest of his life until 1925. In 1887, he has a major success at the Royal Academy. So his career is really set in London and also in the United States. He comes in 1887 to the United States. He expected to stay only a little while. He meets Isabella Stewart Gardner and stays longer, and she gives him more commissions. So we transition from early in his career, yes, he is French, and if he stayed in Paris, he would be French, full stop. But when he is forced to find another way of making money, and he must, because he has to support his mother and his sisters. His father dies, I think, when he's in his 20s. So he must make money for the family, and portraits is how he makes his money. And therefore, he starts to become really well known and appreciated in Boston and then New York. So he makes his contributions. And the person who leavens his career is Isabella Stewart Gardner. Now, the whole idea of Carmencita, which is the last painting I'm going to show you, is for you to understand that in the text panel, it makes us believe that when he saw her during the World's Fair of 1889, he painted her then. But that's not right, because I've looked this up. So he does become enthralled with her. Everybody loves Carmencita. She becomes a celebrity in 1889 when she's performing during the time of the World's Fair. But in 1889, at the end of the year, December, Sargent goes to the United States. And when he's there in 1890, Carmencita's there performing in New York. So that way, he's able to see her up close, and he gets to know her through this private audience, and I'll show you in a moment, at William Merritt Chase's studio. It's then in 1890 that he paints her, and he paints her in a borrowed studio. The borrowed studio that belongs to a woman whose name is Candace Wheeler on 23rd Street. Then in 1892, he brings that painting to Paris, and it is accepted into the Salon, and it is purchased by France. So that is our time outline, I guess you might say. In the 1890s and 1900s, he receives these commissions to become a muralist, which for an artist is far better than just being known as a portraitist. So it really adds to his sense of his career. And then in 1816, he sells Madame X. It's not given, it's sold. And he feels as though it's the best painting that he made in his entire career. So America, New York has his best painting in his opinion. In 1922, interestingly enough, he and a bunch of other people start a gallery in Grand Central Station. So that's something to know about. It doesn't exist anymore. And in addition, in 1923, they create an art school. So he makes a big contribution to America. And a friend of mine, Susan Courtney, who writes about Cassatt, said that it seems to her, we went to the show together, he was saved by his American friends. So I just have to put that out there. I thought it was a very interesting observation she made, because it's true. When he fell down in Paris, it's Henry James and the people that were around his expat and Anglo group that lifted him up, brought him to London, and then it was Mrs. Jack, who created what we know as Sargent's magnificent career. And then on his way back to the United States, unfortunately, the day before, I think that's the timeline, he died suddenly in his studio or his apartment, I imagine, in Chelsea. Okay, we know that he is over 900 oil paintings have survived him, as well as 2,000 watercolors. So this is Carnation Lily Lily Rose, which really put him on top among the English. This is a magnificent painting in the Tate. So please, when you're in London, take a look at it. This is Mrs. Jack. This is really famous. And during her lifetime, her husband felt as though this collar, this really low neckline, people made vulgar remarks about. So it was never shown while her husband was alive in public. After he died, she then put it on public display, but she loved it. And as you can see, she's made to look like she's a sort of Byzantine Madonna. She also bought El Jaleo, which for some people may be their Sargent masterpiece. And this is magnificent. You'll have to go to Boston in order to see El Jaleo. And it goes to Sargent's career painting exotic scenes. This out-of-door study, this is Paul Ehleu, a very close friend of his, is located in Brooklyn. So go see this. It's from 1889. And for Paul Ehleu, he also came here, and the commissions were Grand Central Station. So those of you who go into Grand Central Station, look up at the ceiling, the famous ceiling, which has the constellations. That's Ehleu. And then go into the station master's ticket. You have to have a ticket that says, but just go in there and you'll see that there is his mural. It's gorgeous. And that's Paul Ehleu. So we know that Sargent brought his friends here, and he made, amongst other things, a contribution to American culture. Carmencita, I explained to you, was painted. And Renee, tell us about the dress, because your observations are great.
So for everyone that sees this exhibit, this slide does not do this beautiful painting justice. But the magic in this slide is that the jewel-laden skirt part of what she's wearing literally feels with the pleats as if it's like a top. She's about to start dancing. The jewels are going to take that skirt around to the left, and the movement is amazing. But you need to see it in person, because it's the heft and the broderie, the heaviness of the hem that's going to allow that beautiful full skirt to take her off dancing.
Isn't that right? And she has this wonderful way of looking with that Spanish fierceness that women have, that has so much beauty, power, intentionality. I love flamenco dance. And so I love the way he captured her with all of that sense of just, we call it fierce today, but in the sense of self-possession. He really understood women, and he made women look beautiful. And for that, we thank him. And here's William Merritt Chase. And with this, which belongs to the Metropolitan, we have evidence of exactly how Sargent met her through his friend William Merritt Chase in this opportunity that was in the studio of Chase. He had also a huge studio on the 10th Street. And the fact that it was for a small group of his friends collected for the opportunity to see her dance. And they just loved her. I mean, she really was a superstar. Also, I want you to remember that Emily Sargent has her own show now to open July 1st. And so this is part of the idea of being a Sargent child. The mother required that every day she took them to a museum or to a ruins or a building or whatever, and you had to make your own sketch. And this is how the Sargent children learned to be their own artists individually. And she also, the mother, was an artist. But Sargent's really remarkable because he's really self-taught up until the time that he goes to the Duran Atelier. So it's closing August 3rd. Please buy the catalog if you cannot come. If you are going to be coming to New York, the catalog still, it's just required if you really want to understand what's going on with the work of art in Sargent's life. And also the understanding these curators have explained to you art at the time, which for some reason, we don't really have the same values or the same appreciation, so you need to have a guide. For those of you who have time, on Tuesday, July 29th at 3 o'clock, there's going to be this tour that it will be the exhibition designer, so he'll tell you why the colors of the galleries are so magnificent and all the sort of things that are behind the scenes. If you're going to Paris, the show is going to be in Paris September 23rd till January 11th in 2026. I noticed when I went through the catalog that some of the pieces will not be in the show that we have in New York, so heads up on that one. And it's at the Musée d'Orsay. Also, I just wanted to shout out to these wonderful curators. I just think they're amazing. And so it's Stephanie Herdick and it's Carolyn Corbeau Parsons and it's Paul Perrin. We just have to thank them, and also Carolyn Elenowitz Hess, who has written also for the catalog. So all of them just deserve tremendous kudos. And that's it. Okay.
Thank you,
So
Beth. Thank you so much. I think that everybody is going to be so motivated to see the show before it leaves on the 3rd, or motivated to hop on a plane to Paris for la rentrée to see it at the Musée d'Orsay.
wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really grateful, and I really do sincerely hope that everybody will see the show in person.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you.